Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us to discuss the latest insights from both the Insight Revenue Partners industry report on the state of revenue, and we've also got an exclusive glimpse into a new data set coming from ChartMogul. So really excited to see both of those data sets presented back to back. And then we're going to dive in and have a discussion around what that means, and the key trend that I've been seeing, just even from a qualitative side of things, is this divergence between buyers and sellers, and the gap that's emerging seems to be a general mistrust, right? And I think one of the things that I'm seeing is it's largely being driven by buyers inundated and overwhelmed with choice, right? Choice and volume, and it's making their purchasing decisions so much harder. And so we as sellers really need to figure out how we can close that gap and build trust and credibility with the folks that we want to be able to sell to. So that's the key theme to the day. If that's what you're here to hear, then you're in the right place. And yeah, joined by two fantastic experts on this topic. So Zach, if you'd like to give a quick introduction to yourself and Revenue Insight Partners.
Sure. Great. So nice to meet you both, and for those in syndication later. So I'm Zach Roper. I'm the one of the co-founders of Insight Revenue. We have a deep background in a lot of sales and marketing and customer buying research, which we're going to dive into, sort of that legacy, and then some newer research today. My co-founder is actually the former head of research from Corporate Executive Board and then Gartner over the years. So I have to give him credit for most of the hard brain work on the things I'm going to show. And we're a global consulting, research, and sales training business. So great to be here, Mark. Really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, sure. My name is Sarah Archer, and I am the Chief Revenue Officer at a company called ChartMogul. Maybe you see ChartMogul charts floating around on LinkedIn, but essentially we're an opinionated analytics product that's used by SaaS businesses all over the world to measure and improve key SaaS metrics. So you'll see folks like the CEO of Buffer sharing, ARR charts, LTV charts. And so we sit on a really unique data set of aggregate anonymized data from over 2,500 SaaS businesses. And we have a data-backed sort of marketing program where we try to curate those insights and then publish them in a way that is useful for the industry and folks who are trying to solve interesting growth or retention challenges.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. Right, Zach, why don't you bring up the key slides on the takeaways from this report, and we're going to fly through these two different data sets in roughly 10 minutes each, and then we are going to dive into what this means and how we kind of apply it into our businesses.
Awesome. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
All right, I'll try to push all the right buttons this time, so I don't just bail on the meeting. As we dive into the State of Revenue 2025, we're going to look at a difference between last year's data and this year's. We're 2 years as a business, so we have two comparative data sets. I will say, if you look at this little dial or wheel of the kind of customer experience, part of the data we're looking at is a revenue effectiveness and alignment diagnostic we run with dozens and dozens of companies across different industries and sectors around the world, mostly from US and Europe. And then we also did a buyer study that looked at buying experience, both from the point of view of the sales side and the buying side across those same industries. And then we did hundreds and hundreds of interviews with key leaders and executives to add color into this view. So everybody make sure that there's a whole report on this. I'm going to do a quick hot walk on some of the highlights. As mentioned, a lot of the members of my team, including our co-founder and head of delivery, worked with us together doing research, for almost 20 years on customer loyalty, what's driving performance, customer buying, all these different issues. And a lot of that kind of goes into how we build out our new studies and the questions we're asking. And so the main theme to talk about, where Mark started, this gap that we see, it's really funny because we see this kind of repetitive across industries, across clients, this broken relationship between the buying and selling community, where everybody has a strategy, right? And that strategy, actually, when you look at it come together, sometimes it's ship passing in the night, but other times it's actually diametrically opposed to what the person on the other side of the table is trying to achieve. And so some good examples of this would be, if you look at everyone trying to drive a capital efficient growth strategy on their own business or drive efficiencies in how they spend. On one side, the buyer is looking for, hey, I want low risk. I want, really smart costs. I want, something that doesn't have to be gangbusters right now. I want good enough to do the job. I want to make sure that there's not that much disruption because we're going through so much change. I probably think I'm really special and want customization from my providers and solutions. And I want them to be easier to buy from these days because my world is heck right now. It is very hard to buy things. And the processes internally to get decisions made are becoming more and more complex with more and more pressure on them. Now, if you flip this over to the other side, it makes sense. Our strategy as a CEO, well, when we send out our sales teams, we want similar things, right? We want balanced risk. We need to push through a price increase. Many companies are moving towards a like product to solution or product to platform. So whereas the customer wants to buy something that's easy and less disruptive, we want them to buy a whole solution or platform from us. We want them to be innovative. We want them to do things that are standardized so we know they're going to work well, but also so they're cheaper to deliver. And we want them to look at us as a more strategic partner so we can have quality business. And so we're trying to grab them and pull them in, and they're trying to push us away, right? So let's dive into some of the data that kind of shows what's really going on behind the scenes. This is a hard one to take in just a minute, but if you look at sort of that customer experience at the bottom, is that blue or black line as you see it is last year 23 to 24, and then you have the 24-25 arc. The most obvious thing that you see is in 2023, 2024, and this was a predominantly SaaS. It was a heavy SaaS company-based study. People were really freaking out about prospecting and outbound. Leads were going down. They were all scrambling. Everybody on earth was trying to figure out, how do we do outbound now, right? In the sea of noise. What we see is on that side, it's still the most important thing, but folks are getting much more rational about, okay, we've put some strategies in place. We're doing what we can there, and we're probably going less wide and more focused. And so you see a broad evening out at the middle, right? And so I think what we've seen is we've kind of had the panic moment. And now what we started to realize is we can't actually manage very well those deals end to end. So if you see this between kind of engagement, negotiation, and implementation, sort of middle of the bow tie or flywheel, as some people would think of it, what you see is that a lot of deals are kind of getting put into the funnel, but then they're actually getting stuck at the end. So there's a lot of deals stalling out. And then at the same time, if you actually manage to get over the hump, you actually look at your onboarding and implementation process and realize, hey, this is where we're actually failing to renew and adopt, is the mistakes we're making in those early stages. Though expansion is really important because that's the easiest revenue. So we do see a big flattening out generally of the curve. People need a more consistent system, it seems like, to actually execute their funnel. So if you look at some of the more nuanced views in here, and again, I'll go quickly, but we'll have questions after. One of the biggest themes that jumped out of our last year of research is this huge trust gap. And so what you see on the left-hand side here is sellers' perspectives on these questions. And on the right-hand side, you see buyers' perspective on these questions. And so where there's sort of an ambivalence around your promises of functionality and performance, so obviously the seller is a little bit more confident, and the buyer says, I don't know if you're trustworthy or not, but I'm not assuming you're lying to me. Now, as you go to the right, if you look on the right-hand side, we ask trustworthy around the ROI and the business case that you're making for my business. And this is where it gets to be pretty worrying, because so many companies, especially we see them investing in, we need to work on our value prop and we need to work on case studies and ROI. We put that in front of our customer and hope that builds us the credibility we need to get a deal done. But the customer is now saying, you know what, you're probably showing us the best data that doesn't relate to us. And even if it does, we don't believe it's going to be as effective with us. Even more worrying, though, is your sellers are fairly unconfident about that same information. So if nobody believes what they're talking about, I think this is opening the door to why there really needs to be a different way that folks engage and build credibility and trust in this environment, especially with all this existential questions of how AI is affecting that as well, and the real true relationship that you have that's establishing that trust and credibility through that experience. Now, as we go through this, and dig deeper in, we started to look at, well, what are the skill gaps that you perceive from the sellers that you engage with? And some really interesting things, just to hit a couple of the highlights here. Your buyers think you're actually really good at people relationship building, right? As far as the relationship side, they think for the most part, your folks do that well. And they actually surprisingly say your sales teams are great at negotiating price. That's kind of the opposite of probably what the salespeople are saying, because the salesperson actually thinks that the customer has all the leverage when it comes to the negotiation. And so we're seeing like this is a really interesting contrast where one side always thinks the other is having more leverage. Now, if we flip over to the far right-hand side, which we have a little bit of time for, year one and year two, and honestly doing this work for 15 years, delivering unique insights has always been, on the customer's business, has always been the number one. If you think back to that Challenger study, people have probably seen before that my co-founder Timur did, that spikes to the top of the most important things to actually build loyalty in purchasing. And unfortunately, that continues to be the thing that buyers say sellers are not good at this. So it's worrying that it's both one of the poorest areas and also one of the most important things when it comes to establishing a quality outcome. But as you start to get into value, right, identifying ways of delivering value, and working with you to actually build a credible business case, these are the things that also are still very weak. And so what this shows us is, number one, you can't have insight if you don't understand your customer. And if you're just throwing your case studies and ROI stories against, and it's just bouncing off a wall, that means you don't understand what value means to the customer. And I think that gets to a real disconnect that we, honestly, our whole business is spending a lot of time digging into and focusing on that. Now, as we actually look at some of the more interesting nuanced pieces, while we were at Gartner over the years, we did a lot of studies on how many buyers are involved in a B2B purchase on average. In this study, on average, actually what you find out is sellers say that there's probably 2 or 3 buyers involved in most of their purchases. Now, those same buyers are actually saying there's probably 5 or 6 involved in that same purchase. So even though there's been a ton of research over the years, it's really interesting to see that your sales teams still think that they're getting to half the, they're getting to the buying group and they're only getting to, or even knowing about half the people that are touching that decision. So again, it shows how little curiosity probably we're actually putting into understanding how they're making decisions and why. And I think the final thing we can end up is sort of when we looked at what best practice looks like, not to just end on the problems, we found that high-performing teams are actually connecting the dots across that sort of full buying experience. And so we look at much more process-oriented and capability-oriented execution around, understand the customer. If you can understand their strategy and challenges, you can build that trust and credibility up front. Then you have to be able to bring insight into that journey that they're on, collaborate with them around that value in a much more collaborative way than I think most sales teams are prepared to do. Then you actually have to help the customer with the change management piece to actually get that thing together with the group, get the right scope that is not everything in the kitchen sink, but it's the right thing for them. And then actually build a plan to realize value, not after the deal's done, but before the deal's done these days, to actually make it work. So that is a very fast summary of a year of work, but I look forward to any questions. And I think we'll talk through Sarah's data and then see where this all comes together.
Yeah, that was an incredible run through, Zach. Some fascinating insights that I'm looking forward to diving into. But so we don't dive into them and then not have time to see the ChartMogul data. Sarah, if you want to run through yours, and then we'll see how we're doing for time to discuss both sets.
Yeah, no doubt. And I made my marketing team so anxious today because this report's going live on the 11th. And I was like, I'm just going to pull out some of the insights and tease them on today's conversation because why not? And that's just sort of my MO. So this data has never been seen outside of ChartMogul and a few designers and consultants we work with. So first, let me sort of orient you to the data set itself so you have a sense of what we're looking at. The way that ChartMogul works is it integrates with your subscription management and billing systems. And so what that means is the data that we're going to look at is not self-reported or survey data. It's actually built on the same invoices these 2,500 SaaS businesses send to their customers. So we ingest all of that customer and billing data, we transform it, we normalize it, and we then compute all of the SaaS metrics we know businesses with recurring revenue care about. Moreover, for this report, we did something quite cool, is we enriched that data set and said, okay, well, it's interesting to know about, SaaS metrics on the whole for B2B SaaS businesses, but we also have data from B2C SaaS businesses. Some have product-led motions, some have sales-led motions. And so we actually used a brand new feature within ChartMogul, which is an enrichment feature that we built to enrich this data set to say, okay, well, what can we see specific to go-to-market motions and how things like having a trial and a product-led motion impact conversion. And so the report will come live and, will be totally free to consume. But here I've just pulled out sort of 3 insights for today's conversation. And so 2,500 SaaS businesses, typically between 1 and 70 million in ARR. Here is insight 1. So I spend a lot of time these days thinking about speed. And the first thing that we discovered, we sort of asked the question, how long does it take a SaaS business to hit 1,000 customers? And the top decile, the top performing SaaS businesses, they reach 1,000 customers in just 11 months. And this was just much faster than I anticipated. Of course, median SaaS businesses are hitting this milestone in about 2 years. So one of the biggest existential threats to building a software business is time. And so to me, this insight really reinforces this idea of running a business and a sales team or culture with high a high rate of innovation and intensity. And you see this with some of the businesses that are doing really well. I think Fixer hit 10 million ARR from 1 million in a mere 5 months yesterday. And so where AI is sort of freeing us up to do administrative things that have previously taken us a lot of time, we as SaaS revenue leaders now have a lot of time to do creative endeavors and sort of new demand gen things. And so where I'm seeing some of the fastest, most successful businesses in terms of revenue growth, they're really doing, and it sounds cliche to say, innovative things around go-to-market than their counterparts, deploying the same old playbooks. And I'm sure those same businesses are equipped with some of the skills that Zach was talking about. But there's definitely a speed and intensity that's sort of required to be a top performing business. And so when you look at this chart, which I guess I can make a tiny bit bigger, you can see that B2C businesses are hitting that 1,000 mark in just 4 months. And a year for the median, but these top quartile B2B SaaS businesses are doing it in 11 months, which I feel is very wicked fast. So the next thing that we're going to look at is conversion data. And let me first orient you to what we're looking at here. So this is the percentage of subscribers converting from trial to paid. And on the left-hand side, you have those SaaS businesses with a product-led motion. And on the right-hand side, you have the businesses with a sales-led motion, as indicated by the presence of a sales team, a contact us sales form, and the research that our enrichment tool does. And so the takeaway here is that sales-led go-to-market motions lift conversions. Across both product-led and sales-led data sets, we're seeing that conversion peaks within 7 days. Your buyers are making quick decisions, or maybe, your sales cycle's sort of dying into existence. But I work with a lot of founders and a lot of teams who are sort of the mind that the product sells itself or the trial experience delivers value. And where I really like to push businesses is sort of back to basics, where when you're having a sales team sit on top of those good leads and actually pick up the phone and call and try to deliver those unique insights, that's where you can make a real impact quickly, which can, of course, add to the speed that we looked at in the last insight. And finally, our team was really, it's funny because our team that put this together was really surprised by this insight. And I was like, it's not that surprising. But what we find in the data is that discounting isn't a shortcut to speed up your funnel. And so here we're looking at sales cycle length by average sale price and discount status. And so your orange bars here are those customers that you acquired without a discount. The blue bars are those customers that you acquired with a discount. And so my take here when I look at this, and I think I'm in good company of revenue leaders, is that oftentimes discounts are sort of this rescue mission for deals that are already dragging. Maybe there's some timeliness around end of quarter, or there's some regional differences. But largely speaking, when I look at this, what I see is that you're often using discounts as a point of leverage over the course of your sales cycle to push something through that arguably isn't necessarily a good ICP or use case fit. And so that's my interpretation of this data, or one interpretation of this data here. So never before seen, we do all kinds of stuff like this. Hopefully you can connect and, digest this. Actual report will probably be 15 or so pages, but it's worth a look. And we'll look forward to, hearing your feedback and having a bit of a dialogue about it.
It's awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Super interesting. The first thing that strikes me is, and again, the data sets are not comparable, right? Which we talked a bit about. So your data sets are a little bit more PLG driven, even where there's a sales motion on top, it tends to be slightly smaller order values and so on. And Zach's is largely pulled from more mid-market enterprise types of motions. So what for me is really striking is that acceleration of sales velocity and revenue velocity on the more PLG mid-market, like SMB side of things. Does that suggest there isn't a trust gap there? If anything, people are like buying into the brand and they are just willing to like go and try it. I mean, you mentioned the point that you kind of need a sales rep to engender some trust and maybe get them further along, whereas the real trust gap is in those more mid-market and enterprise type of motions. It's kind of a question, but yeah, back to you, Sarah and Zach.
Yeah, so my interpretation when you look at the average sales cycle length by average sale price for each motion is that some products that are very inexpensive, the product experience delivers like straight away, and they kind of do sell themselves, right? Like that's where I think of like a 1Password or a Loom, for example. But what I have seen in working with very many founders and CEOs is a lot of folks think that they have a product that fits into that category, and they just don't. And so I think that they want to sort of say, just trust us. It's going to be as remarkable as, we tell you it is. But in reality, you actually need a person to sort of further that credibility through conversation.
Got it. And Zach, similar question to you, but maybe slightly reframed. So, and I don't know if this is an unfair question. You've probably got more qualitative insights that sit under the data. Is the absence of trust, or this trust gap, is it being driven at an organizational level? Are buyers not trusting the claims of a company, or is it an individual skill set gap with sales reps who don't build trust themselves with the prospect, right? Like they're two quite distinct pieces, and I'm just wondering which one do you think is driving the biggest issue?
So I think, it's a great question, because I'm sure there's an argument for either side. I think what you have is a general atrophy on both sides. And so having been working in this space for almost 20 years, I think what you see is sort of a lot of what's old is new again. So I think when money was flowing, a lot of people got away with a lot of garbage as far as how they went to market, go to market. And so in the boom times, and people were buying tons of stuff, right? And government money was entering the markets. And so you had a lot, I think, of atrophy in general, and especially in SaaS organizations, where just the things you needed to do to sell, you stopped doing them because it was more like we're in order taking mode and we're very reactive. And so I think Also, what happened is people bought a lot of stuff that didn't work. It didn't get adopted. It wasn't what they needed. And a lot of people lost their jobs, and the scrutiny came down, and they said, okay, I never want to be burned again. And so you have this increased scrutiny and skepticism because everyone was sort of burned buying a ton of stuff when they weren't that worried about it. And then you have this event where, like, obviously the economic instability and the pressure of that and the waves of layoffs. And so this increased scrutiny and skepticism is causing, I think, more pressure on sales, more pressure on individuals. But unfortunately, on the sales side, they're not rising to the occasion. They're the lack of curiosity, the lack of understanding of the customer strategy. So they're having, kind of the product strategy shoved down their throat, and they're pushing it as hard as they can to market. And they're doing things like medic, heavy qualification training. And it's forcing them to say, like, oh, okay, so I need to forecast correctly. I need to run people through my process, which also then again does disintermediate from like actually understanding the customer and delivering value. And then on top of that, you got all this AI tech stack in the sales side that's supposed to make you a better salesperson, but shutting your brain off and making you try all these tricks to like inundate the customers with information, hoping you're just going to keep shaking trees until they fall out, right? And so I think from both sides, buying is getting harder and more complex because there's so much change. On the sales side, people are not like rising because you don't have to be as good as you were 8 years or 10 years ago. You got to be a lot better because buying is so hard. But it's a shift. I think it's a shift to learning how to support a buying process and a smart decision in an objective way is much different a job than like, I'm going to convince you that this platform, you absolutely, you can't live another day unless you buy it. Yeah. I think there's the other thing of AI. So in Sarah's data, I was going to ask you, which is, you have a new wave though, right? So people started getting rid of all their SaaS tools and other things when the CFO became in charge. But then everyone's now said you need an AI strategy, right? So now people are going out and they're like, oh crap, we got to try all these new things and all this stuff. And a lot of it's PLG driven, right? So now you have this other motion where it's okay, but it's okay only to do pilots or something that's free and then try to make sense of all that. So you have another wave now of unstructured, unstrategic buying, but those aren't strategic purchases, right? These are small sort of transactional things that people are trying to figure out in the AI space a lot of the time. So yeah. I do see that there's probably a mix of these trends happening.
Some great points. And Sarah, from your perspective, what are you seeing? You're seeing this acceleration again in quick growth around the top quartile. What are they getting right about building trust with their buyers?
I think early and heavy investment in brand building has been like a really big resurgence where it's like, we can't get by with like scrap ad copy and like a very weak corporate identity. I think some of the biggest businesses who are succeeding, they're everywhere. And the quality of the image, the business is strong. Like the business identity is really thoughtful. And I think that is definitely fuel for sellers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it feels like I'm being really boring at the moment, but everyone that I speak to, I'm banging the drum around the importance of brand. Right? You've got to invest in brand to build this trust and bridge that gap. So a conflicting narrative that I'm hearing, and it is quite conflicting, and it shows up in your data, Zach, in particular. So I'm really keen to get both of your takes on this. One narrative is you got to sell the end result, right? Sell the ROI. People won't buy inputs. They don't care about the process, right? They want outcomes, right? Sell the outcomes. Then you've got a competing narrative, which is saying people don't buy outcomes, right? They don't believe them. It's just BS, right? They're buying a specific set of actions, a set of workflows that you can do better than anyone else. So actually, ultimately, you cannot promise these outcomes, right? Because those outcomes are so multivariate and faceted. All you can do is promise that you will provide the inputs that your software or AI can provide. So two very competing narratives. What's your take? What should we be selling? Is it outcomes or is it inputs? Zach, I'll land you with that big question first because it does come in your data.
So the way I look at it, starting with data and how we look at it, I think you start with why about 50% of deals die on the vine. right? So most companies are still competing less against the competition and more against the customer's inability to purchase. And so I think this is where that shows up really loudly, is that the buyer is setting up the buying group and the buying motion, and someone's now being sent out, whether it's a head of HR or somebody from the tech team, like they're going out now trying to solve the need of the company. And so they're supposed to, and those needs are really, really a high bar now. And then they're saying like, I need to find the ROI, but at the same time, so we're going through these processes. We're learning about a lot of things. We're getting excited. And then as a company, we're saying, yeah, but we don't believe this. This isn't going to work. We're terrible at change management. It's not going to work for us. And so, and then you've got where everything stalls out, right? And that's where most deals just die. And so getting over that line, if you manage to get over the line and it's a bad fit customer, then you're just pushing churn down the road, right? If you're super convincing, and then you don't, and you set too high a bar that you're never going to meet, right? So I think it's about objectivity is really the thing. And so in the state of revenue, we included an example of a process that like a high performing purchase, a high quality purchase follows. I think that's the key now. It's less about like my opportunity roadmap. It's like, how do I build a customer value roadmap, we call it, that actually guides a customer and that buying group through a quality decision-making process, so they themselves can actually rationalize and make trade-off decisions and not make stupid promises they can never keep to each other, and say, okay, great, now we actually believe and we're going to make a decision and we're going to do something important for our business and no more shortcuts. If you don't know how to help your customer get through that, most likely they're going to do a shortcut or not buy anything.
Absolutely love that. Thanks, Zach. Sarah, you nodding a fair bit there. Anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I mean, the ROI conversation is my least favorite conversation as a buyer. So much so that I'll stop a rep. I'm like thinking of a sales cycle. I mean, it was a long time ago. It was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And, you know, she was doing if we were to move the needle 2% on churn. And I was like, I know what you're doing. Like, this is the cool part about selling to sales leaders. They get it. This isn't how we make business decisions. The reality is, like, you know, when you think about building a business on a long-term horizon, there's 50 things I could do this quarter that might make a difference for ChartMogul's growth rate. And if I choose the right one or two, you know, that could have an outsized impact on the trajectory of our business in the long term. But of those 50 things, probably buying anything is fewer than 20 of those things. And it's so very unlikely that the one or two things is buying something. And so I think where the selling ROI or outcomes is like frustrating or challenging for me is the truth is that most of the partners or vendors that I work with, they just don't know enough about what those 5 things could be for my business. And therefore, it's just a conversation not worth having.
Yeah. Really good insight. I want to pause real quick and ask Ruben, Ralph, anything that you would like to either add in, right? You guys are both really experienced sales leaders yourself in this space. So anything you'd like to add in as a comment, or if you do have any questions?
Yeah, I've got a comment first, I guess, on the ROI piece. And generally, I'm aligned to the message that you're saying. And you know, what I found over the years is you've got to build that trust first. And there you want to be hitting the emotional buttons and building, you know, this picture of the utopia of whatever it is that the executive or leader wants to do. And coming back to your point, Sarah, on what are the real pain points in their business right now? And can you actually move the needle of that pain point? And once you've got to that, then I found that ROI and business case can help, but you've got to be, you know, you're in the kind of the middle, if not the second half of the sales cycle. And always, you know, taking the stats that you've got, you know, we moved the needle 30%. Maybe we won't manage that here. Maybe we're aiming at 10 or 15% with you. How does that feel within your organization and how you manage change management, et cetera? So that's that piece. One question, just trying to come back and trying to remember all of the different data sets. Sarah, I think it was in your slides. It was, you showed a slide later where you were talking about the average sale price.
Yeah.
But on the slide for, I think to hit 1,000 customers and how quickly they were doing it.
Yeah.
Did that have any kind of average sale price data behind it? Because Again, I'm sitting here generally selling to enterprises and thinking, wow, 1,000 customers in under a year. That is my utopia.
Trust me, that's always how I feel when I look at our benchmark data.
Yeah, exactly. But for many other SaaS companies selling simpler, cheaper solutions, then that might well be feasible.
Yeah, we'll have to tease it out. And I don't know that our data set on the high end will be sizable enough to say something meaningful about enterprise or even mid-market over a certain ACV. But I'll ask the insights team.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Ralph, anything you'd like to jump in with?
No, I would agree with Ruben's comments as well. I think the whole part of the conversation around ROI is entirely subjective. It's really only the customer that can start to put that stake in the ground, and they know internally from a buying perspective how far out they can put that stake with realism. I think the crucial part, what Ruben just said, and I think Zach, you touched on this as well, is for me the crucial part is the business case, supporting the customer in building that business case, making sure that you've got all of the criteria that they're looking for present within your proposition to them, in most cases trying to, where they will allow it, co-create that business case with them and make sure that you are all talking the same language internally, because it doesn't matter unless it's a direct cost replacement or a cost saving. We're ripping $1 million worth of stack out and we're putting 500K back in that's going to do the same thing. Stay away from ROI altogether. Let them decide what that is. It's just too subjective.
Yeah.
Salesforce was Salesforce whiteboarding sessions like back in the day were like really remarkable with this. They used to have sort of like this framework where they would have if you were selling to Walmart, you had to have to like walk into a Walmart store and you'd have to like call Walmart customers. You'd have to like experience everything how their customers would. And I can't remember this framework, but I remember, and in advance of like flying to Omaha to do your whiteboarding session, you had to have all of the language, have all of the firsthand experience in order to participate in that. Let's co-create the solution together. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely can be done well, but I guess it just depends. And it's a skill that most folks just aren't good at or don't have the opportunity to learn. A lot of sellers don't have the opportunity to learn those skill sets.
That's a absolutely killer point, Sarah. They don't have the opportunity to learn. Time is just too short and precious now. The internal commercial pressure on sellers is huge at the moment as well to deliver. And particularly when you start folding back in all of that enterprise ecosystem that used to sit around some of the selling environments. And, we're now everybody's looking for full cycle reps. The SDR is on a 1-to-4 ratio or 1-to-6 ratio or whatever it is, if you're lucky enough to have one, etc. So the time pressure is just too much to do a huge amount of that almost kind of quantitative and qualitative research on your customers. You have to do, kind of top down, bottom up, but in a much shorter time frame to try and sound credible. And I think that feeds into Zach's research, the results from Zach's research as well. We can't expect every single seller in every organization to be like the top performer. There's always a gap in skill. There's always a gap in understanding. The commercial acumen or the business acumen isn't there because they just haven't had time in role, or they just don't have that experience. We're all sitting here with 20 plus years experience in sales environments, running businesses, talking to businesses. We kind of get that A to D or E part of a customer's business, but we don't know the F to Z part at all. It takes a lot of time to build up that knowledge.
For sure. One of the phrases that when I was sort of really learning sales, I read proactive selling, I think it was called. It was like a fairly old sales framework now, and there's a concept in there which is transfer of ownership, right? And that's a tipping point in a sales cycle where the customer can start to describe in their own words how they will apply your solution, and it will drive positive change in their organization, right? And if they can start to articulate that, it's much more powerful than ROI. It's like, here's how I see as adopting. Zach, you made the point in your slides again, it's about implementation, right? If they can articulate, here's how I see this positively impacting my team, my organization, you're more than halfway there on the sales then. Sometimes, and again, Zach, I think you made this point around with the CFO more in seat these days, that's where you need the ROI argument, right? There's still an exercise of, well, they don't really care how it's going to be implemented, but you do need to be able to justify this large purchase on some kind of objective metric, and that's where you need to build your business case and your ROI. So they're sort of different strands of the same sales cycle. Right, I'm conscious of time. I did want to ask this one question of you both. So I've seen, like, RevDup is an AI first and an AI native business, right? So I'm very much conscious of the debate around whether AI is actually eroding or improving trust within the market, right? And I think more people believe, through poor application in many cases, that AI is having a detrimental impact on how we sell and how buyers trust. So I guess the question to both of you, and maybe Sarah, I'll start with you, is do you think AI can have a positive impact on closing this buyer and seller gap? And if so, how? What are the use cases you think it can be positively used for?
Yeah, I guess any tool in the hands of a good seller can improve the situation, maybe even a CRM. Maybe, I don't know. The use case that I guess we've pressure tested the most internally is account research, and making sure that our sellers are just showing up knowing more than over the last 5 years, I think. Like, it just, because maybe there was such an order taking time, sellers are we're just not showing up prepared or flexible, ready to be flexible enough to take the conversation in the right direction. And I think account research has just been the safest area for us to experiment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's so transformative in that space for sure. Zach, what's your take?
Yeah, I think along similar lines, if you actually look at where AI is going to sort of take human jobs away in the sales and service space, it's going to be the things that are most transactional first, right? And so these days, order taking is not something you need a salesperson for, because if I already know everything and I just want a good price, there's going to be a way of doing that, and I don't need you as a person to engage with. I can figure out how to game the system. But sales is really about, it's shaping ideas, shaping demand, right? And if that is the job of sales, and that's where humans really can make better decisions together, I think, how is AI going to help that? And I think this is you have this little bit of contrast where, like, account research, right? If you really look at this idea of, like, when I say the word insight, it can mean anything, but really what we're seeing the best salespeople are able to do is they show up with a hypothesis based on, like, I know what an apple, I know orange, a pear looks like. And if I show up and I'm like, I'm guessing you're a pear, I don't know, but since I've talked to, like 20, 100 people like you, I'm going to go in with my knowledge, but I'm also going to go in with the knowledge of my company. And this is where we can alleviate, I think, Ralph, what you're saying is, like, you need 20 years to be able to, actually, we found through years of experience, there's things that you can do to make everybody behave where they can come in with a hypothesis, and having AI to do your research can make you way better at presenting a hypothesis up front that, by the way, that's not the whole end all, right? Because then you test for where they are, what their problem really is, what their strategy really is, and then you got to collaborate to build the business case with them around what matters to them. You can't come in with something canned and think that's going to last through the whole process. But so there are things AI can do to help you research. There's things AI can do to help you target better customers. Obviously, there's things AI can do to help you come up with insights as a company and understand, like, how do we get the best ideas in front of the team at scale so that they know which ideas to test with which customers to create that hypothesis. But you then have the dumbing down on the flip side, right? If you don't teach reps the right strategy, if you don't actually, help them to have curiosity to understand and how to collaborate and how to map that buying process, like, if they don't know how to do all that stuff and they're just coming in with a pitch and they're going to spew something they learned and it's not going to resonate and they're not going to be able to have good discovery, right? And I think that's where I think managers and teams are over investing in shortcuts, and they're dumbing down the operation to drive some kind of efficiency in forecasting. And that's good. That's backfiring on everybody. And so I think AI tools are going to get better. And I think there's going to be a reckoning happening now. And then so hopefully folks do stop, and the winning companies will be the ones who actually do this in a strategic way.
100%. I think my take is there is way too much focus on efficiency at the expense of efficacy. right? So like people, this might be a pretty dumb example, but like people have been taught like they don't know how to cook, but so they produce bad food, but then they're enabled to produce 10 times more bad food, right? And instead they need to be told how to cook in the first place, and that can then be properly scaled with AI, but you've got to have that taste and expertise in the first place to add the guardrails, right? So I think people went too quick to like, I'm just going to use tooling and it's going to solve all my problems, when actually the human plus AI is the golden place to be, right? You've got to have those guardrails and expertise to know what great looks like. And then AI can be a very powerful tool to help you take what works and scale that versus scaling something that's already broken. Look, guys, we've run past time already, so I do appreciate you you staying on a few more minutes. And like the data sets are just fascinating. I could talk about it for the rest of the afternoon, to be honest. So really appreciate you you sharing those insights, and hopefully you guys can connect after as well. And I will send out notes on where to connect with you guys. I know a lot of people will see this on demand as well. So Ralph, Ruben, thank you so much for being here live, and for everyone on demand, appreciate the time as well. All right.
Pleasure. Really
Thanks,
enjoyed
everybody.
it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, guys. Take care. Bye.